Welcome to Field Trials, a future farming webcast exploring innovations, issues, and perspectives in new farm technology. This is Matt, your Canadian farm kid and journalist host. Thanks for tuning in. Farmers have their pick when it comes to digital agronomy tools. They're pretty effective, there's lots of them, and they're getting better all the time. But perfection, of course, remains elusive. In this episode of Field Trials, we chat with precision ag expert and Kansas State professor Raj Khosla about how we can more effectively measure spatial differences in the field and make management calls without the guesswork. We also touch on what new measurement tools could look like, a brief history of GPS, and the relevance of doing more with less given our contemporary climate context and policy goals. So that kind of reminds me of, and perhaps this is something that you've mentioned in the past. I can't remember where I heard it, but the idea of having sensors, even something like a tiny micro sensor that can be essentially planted along with the crop as you're going through, like that kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Right. So mode of disposal of sensor, only time will tell how we're going to do it. But you're exactly right. We're talking about tiny sensors. The micro is okay. And in many cases, battery-less sensors. They do not have any battery. They're sleeping all the time. You basically actuate them using radio waves that can penetrate through soil or through plant and wake them up. And then for a millisecond or even a smaller than a millisecond time, they perform the function that they are being placed for, and then they go back to sleep. But the information is sent back through a wireless sensor network. So at any given instance, so imagine, the radar towers at our airport, they're omnidirectional, right? They're going in all the direction, and they're picking up signals where the airplanes are in 3 dimensions, right? So this would be a similar thing where you have omnidirectional reader that pings the sensor, wakes them up, records its location, time, parameter of interest, and then it's done. And you can generate all those data points using a software to create a surface of your field saying, hey, you want to know instantly what is the soil moisture in the soil profile before I actuate an irrigation. You can do that. Are we there yet? We're not there yet.
That's what I was going to ask. Exactly. And like, that's science fiction stuff. but I guess all this ag text really is science fiction at one time or another, right?
But we're getting closer to that. You can do this today. In fact, we did this in 2012 at one of our research experimental fields, where we had embedded 41 access tube, moisture sensor access tube down to 5-foot depth, okay, where we were measuring soil moisture in different times during the growing season. And 41 access tubes were placed in 10 acres. So this is having one sensor node per quarter acre. I know it sounds like we overdid it, but we don't know what not to collect at this time because there's so much spatial and temporal heterogeneity that's out there in Mother Nature. We want to capture that, okay? We want to measure that, account that, so that we can translate that into a decision. Because we know how to grow. I mean, our farmers are getting very good every year. I mean, they have been very good, but they keep getting good, and better every year. So we know how to grow, and we can produce a lot. But the challenge is, how do we continue to produce more with less? Particularly if you have read about the USDA Agricultural Innovation Agenda that came out of the Secretary's office, it calls for reduction in water application or water consumption in agriculture by 50% by year 2050. So we have 38 more crop cycles, okay? Likewise, a reduction in nitrogen consumption by 50%. So how do we continue to produce more with less and less? And this is where digital agriculture or precision agriculture has a very large role to play, applying the right input at the right time, at the right place, in the right amount, and in the right manner.
That's I think a really important way to contextualize this conversation too. I know, so I haven't read that specific USDA or not USDA. I haven't read so much on the American example, but certainly up here in Canada, we have been having that conversation both at a provincial level and particularly federally, with specific regard to fertilizer, reducing fertilizer use. It's been a very, very controversial, I'll say, position that the government has taken on that. So yeah, that's really important to remember. I guess with that, so we're, as you say, we're not necessarily at the point where we're able to collect. We're at a point where we're still learning what we need to learn, but that be fair to contextualize it that way. So if we're still at that stage, I mean, what's the next step then? What's kind of the next step in terms of trying to get to what you described, where we're able to get down to whatever level it is that we need and get the exact information that we need? What do we have to fill that gap in with?
Right. So going back to the verbiage that you were using, Matt, that we need rapid, reliable, reproducible, inexpensive sensors, absolutely. But not only any sensor, we need diagnostic sensors. So for example, you go to a physician and the physician measures your blood glucose. That's a diagnostic measure that gives you a quantitative measure of your blood glucose in the body, and right? Likewise, agriculture, if you look at last several decades, have been using surrogate measure, which is an indirect way of telling you, how much soil moisture is in the soil or how much nitrogen is in your plant or in the soil. We need, if we want to achieve our targets, where we want to continue to produce more with less, we'll have to make diagnostic measures. Okay. Now, doing it with labor, walking through the fields, that's one approach, but that's time consuming, labor intensive, and expensive. We can't do that. And this is why we need to work towards developing sensors. Now, I'm not saying that's the only approach. That's one of the approaches that would take us there. And the good news is many, many, many laboratories and private partners today are working towards that, either coupling existing implements with these sensors. So when these implements are running across the field, they can gather more information, such as organic matter or electrical conductivity or optical properties of soil, or counting the number of plants, planting geometry, plant height. All these sensors are getting infused into our equipment and implements to avoid another trip going through the field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's where we are. We're slowly making progress.
Avoiding the fuel bill, if nothing else, right?
Right.
Right on.
Right.
Well,
and fuel is getting more expensive. I don't know how it is in north of here, but it's getting pretty expensive. Yeah,
it's bad. I think I filled up I got a little Ford Ranger. Luckily, it's not that large of a vehicle, but I think I filled it up for $2.10 a liter, which is pretty gnarly, I have to say. But maybe that's a conversation for another time.
Yes.
Anyway, thanks, Raj. I really appreciate it. I think we can end on, I think, a fairly positive note, aside from the fuel, and let you go.
Okay, thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you, man.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you got something out of the conversation. As ever, the idea is to explore topics, items, and perspectives in the ag tech space. So if you're interested in sharing your own perspective and joining us for a conversation, feel free to get in touch with the Future Farming team at futurefarming.com. You can also reach me directly at FurRural on Twitter. That's at FERRURAL on Twitter, or via ruralphilosopher.com. Thanks again for listening.